Hi everyone, I'm Lucinda Krahl.
I'm Quyen Castellanos. We are both C2s from the Dallas office, and we won this year's Design Thinking Challenge. For those of you that aren't familiar with the challenge, it's an internal event that takes place every year that provides exposure to Finns that are interested in UCD and learning more about some of the design processes that we use at Pariveda.
So the first part of the Design Thinking Challenge is to come up with a wicked problem to solve. A wicked problem is a form of social or cultural problem that's difficult to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, or changing requirements. So this is different than your classic technical problem. This is a problem that has a lot of different sides and a lot of different people involved in it. So the first step was to come up with a wicked problem to solve. The problem that we arrived at was how can users easily document their travels using multiple types of media? So this was a personal problem for both Quyen and I. We both really love to travel either with our family or our friends or through work, but we document our travel in very different ways. I like taking pictures and using social media, where Quyen is more of an artist or a journaler, and we figured that this is a problem that other people might experience too, and would be really interesting to talk to potential users and come up with a solution. So this is the problem that we arrived at. The first method, the first part of design thinking is discovery. This phase is to collect data from users in the context of the problem. So the first thing we did was we did a survey, which many of you took, so thank you so much for doing that. The point of this survey was to gather quantitative data and also determine the different methods that people use to document their travel. We also wanted to get a wide potential user base, so not just the people that we interact with day to day, but people from varying areas of the country, maybe different ways that they travel, if they have families, if they don't. We really wanted to reach out to as many people as we could. So a few important statistics that we came away with. 96% of people said that they used videos and photos to document their travel. Not very surprising, but still really good to have that data. Also, when we asked people, why do you not document their travel, 76% of people said that they would rather enjoy the moment. This is a really important insight coming away from discovery. Also, we got that wide range of potential users. Our age range of the participants were 20 to 54. After the survey, we moved on to user interviews. The point of user interviews is to really dive into those pain points and the motivations. So these were 15 to 20-minute interviews that we did with, around 10 people, family and friends, to ask, a little more into how they document their travel. So a few important insights from these interviews. One, at the top left, you can see they wish they really had documented more. They'd be looking back on their travels and think, I really wish I had written this down, or I really wish I had taken a picture of that amazing paella I had in Spain. Also, people had a really wide range of methods. So some people were very tangible. They really liked collecting things like brochures. Other people really liked taking videos. Some people liked writing journal entries. It really was quite a range. Also, people had different motivations. Some people really wanted to be able to look back on the experience themselves, and others really wanted to share with their family and friends when they returned. And finally, this recurring insight, again, that being in the moment is really important. So some of the quotes that we had from these interviews around the side, such as, I journal all the things I want to remember later, or I always regret not taking more pictures.
The second phase of design thinking is synthesis, and this is where we take all of the data that we gathered from our surveys and our interviews in the discovery phase and begin to develop insights. So the first method of synthesis that we used is called affinity mapping, with the goal of taking all of these data points and beginning to find common themes across the data. The process for that is writing down on sticky notes different quotes or statistics that we gathered and moving the sticky notes around a whiteboard next to other stickies that seemed related. And in this process, we were able to identify common patterns across the data. Some examples of some of the themes of documenting travel and just travel experiences in general were feelings, methods, pain points, and sharing. The biggest takeaway from affinity mapping was that we were able to identify 4 unique personas, all of whom differed in methods as well as motivations for documenting their travels. The storyteller, for example, who is more externally motivated, will opt for social media or taking photos and videos, always considering how can I return home and tell a story to my friends and family. The soul searcher, on the other hand, is much more internally motivated. So they will engage in methods that allow them to draw in closer to their experiences and really be in the moment while also having something to look back on later. So they will use methods such as journaling or creating artwork. The collector, who is also more internally motivated, really values the tangible nature of documentation. So they will oftentimes collect souvenirs or purchase music, maybe ingredients from their travels, and cook with them when they return. The collector values this opportunity to bring things from their travels that they can reuse in their everyday lives, allowing them to re-immerse in those really unique experiences. And then finally, the family traveler is more externally motivated. And just like their name, they tend to travel with family members, perhaps parents of younger children that really want to capture these unique moments of their children's first experiences. Another method of synthesis that we used is called experience mapping. And this is where we map out the user's experience from the point of planning for travel all the way to returning from their trip and reflecting on their trip, looking back at photos or rereading journal entries. And the goal here was to identify different points along this experience that we either wanted to elevate or reduce. So for example, we wanted to increase that feeling of awe that users feel when they're traveling and experiencing something for the first time. We wanted to increase the connectedness that they feel with others when they're looking back on their trip and sharing photos or rereading journal entries. And then we wanted to reduce that feeling of regret that a lot of users expressed when they return from their travels and feel as though they didn't document enough on their trips.
The next stage of design thinking is ideation. We have all the data, we have these insights, but now we need to do something with it. So the point of ideation is to come up with a lot of ideas. And to get those creative juices flowing, we did a warm-up exercise called Scamper. The point of this is to take some kind of method or pattern and then kind of flip your assumptions using these verbs in the acronym. For example, we took taking photos. If you were to substitute something in the process of taking photos, what would that solution look like? So, well, let's substitute the actual photo. Maybe you could have a drawing. Maybe you could have a postcard. So you can see that this is just a way to kind of challenge those assumptions and remove the box that you're thinking in for your solutions. So after that, we were coming up with solutions. We did a method called pattern plus insight equals feature. The way that this works is you have these axes. So you can see the yellow Post-it notes are certain design patterns. So it could be, sharing economy, so, Uber, Lyft, etc. Could be group document editing, so Google Docs. It could be reviews like Yelp. And then on the top axis, you can see we have the white Post-it notes, which are different insights that we had from discovery and synthesis, such as the users wanting to be in the moment, the emphasis on convenience, wanting to share with their family. And then we take Post-it notes, and at the intersection of those insights and patterns, we put what a potential solution could be. And we came to this document. You can see the blue cells are where we had a lot of overlap, or ideas that we thought had a lot of potential. So after this, we had a lot of ideas. Here's just a few of them, everything from printing social media to having voice recordings. We had a crazier one that just involved a drone following you around to take pictures. But unfortunately, our mentor could not get approval for that funding. But we ended up coming down to these three important methods. So the first one over here is multimedia entries. This is really trying to reach out to all kinds of personas, people who really want to dive in with journal entries or people who want to look back on photos. We really want to have all kinds of multimedia entries. Also up here, prompts for reflection. So something to kind of prompt the user to be more in the moment and also document their travel. And then finally, visual slots to see progress. So either categories or some kind of way for the user to see how far along they are in their documenting for their travel. So after we came up with all these ideas, we looked back at our problem statement and we realized it wasn't really addressing what our users were experiencing. Originally, it was just how do users document travel with multimedia entries. But we realized that the real problem was this tension between being in the moment and having documentation at the end of your trip. So we actually reframed our problem statement to be how can users enjoy the moment when they're traveling while still having documentation to look back on their travels.
The final two phases of design thinking are prototyping and validation, and this is where you want to do at least 2 iterations to check the soundness of your solution. So at this point, Lucinda and I realized that a mobile app would probably best address our wicked problem. So we began to sketch up wireframes of what some of the screens would look like, as well as some of the navigation between those screens. For our first prototype, we focused on the feature of the ability to create multimedia entries, so either text entries or photo and video, or perhaps audio. We also allowed users to categorize these entries based off of what they were capturing. So perhaps architecture, people, or food. For our first validation session, we took on the approach of simulating a travel experience. So we met with a few Dallas Finns during lunch and went to Clyde-Warren Park, which is just down the street from the Dallas office, and asked them to pretend like they were experiencing Clyde-Warren for the first time and to interact with our app as though it was a means of documenting this really unique experience. So our main findings from this validation session is that users really enjoyed the categories feature. They liked being able to create entries and organize them in that way. They also enjoyed the one-stop nature of the app, so rather than leveraging multiple apps on their phone to document or different methods, this was one app that they could use throughout their trip. And then also we found that users really used the photo and video entries the most, which was very much in line with our surveys that we took during the discovery phase. On the other hand, some test users seemed uncertain of the purpose, and this suggested that maybe we didn't provide enough context during our validation session, and then also maybe we needed to revisit the design of the app. And then also the biggest takeaway, I think, from the first validation session is that it's extremely challenging to force being in the moment and really to assess how in the moment people are. So for our second prototype, we kept a lot of the same features as well as implemented a number of new features. We added the ability for users to create a trip. And this because perhaps you're going on multiple trips and you want to look back. Users could input different fields of information, such as a name for the trip, the location, number of days. We also kept the ability to add categories, so users could still do that. We also kept the multimedia entry nature of it. So we could still create photo entries, for example. So if a user was at a restaurant like Tacos and Tequila, they could take a picture there. Or they could take a picture at an actually good restaurant. We also added the ability for users to skip this portion. So rather than adding a caption, which would force the users to interact more with the app, we allowed them to just kind of completely skip over that part. And then we kept the audio entries because we thought that there was a really nice convenience factor to creating audio entries. Rather than having to interact with the app a lot while creating text entries, they could simply just record. Now with the text entries, we added the ability for users to respond to prompts. So as you can see in the placeholder of this entry, the users are prompted to write about a certain topic. And this, drawing back to the storyteller persona, was really an opportunity for users to draw in closer to the moment while also responding to their experiences and having something to look back on later. We also added a progress bar, which you might see at the top, and this indicated how far along they were on their trip and that maybe they should document more as they draw closer to the end. And then finally, we added the ability to view different entries, which looked different based off of the type of media that was used. So for our second validation session, we took on a completely different approach because, like I said previously, we found it extremely challenging to assess how in the moment users really were. So for this approach, we used A/B testing, and we asked users to compare their own methods, so either taking photos or maybe writing a journal entry or sketching something, versus our method, which of course is the app. And our main findings from this session were that users seemed to have the same amount of distraction, which, while not ideal, was preferable to increased distraction. They also said that it was easier to create and view entries. They also tended to use more of a variety now that they had the options of text and audio as well as photo and video. And then lastly, one test user said the progress bar was depressing because it meant that his PTO was almost over and he would have to return to work.
So obviously the design thinking challenge had to end, and we only had time to do 2 different prototyping phases. But we did think through what the future state would look like to solve this wicked problem. So for our app, we would love to incorporate goals for your trip. So if I'm going on a weekend trip, I could say I want to take at least 2 pictures of people every single day, or I want to document, everything that I eat at a restaurant. So something that you could set it for yourself. Also, it would be really easy to share, which is really reaching out to that storyteller persona and the family traveler persona. So it'd be easy to share on social media or just to scroll through with your friends at the end of your trip. And group contributions would also be a really good method to add. So if Quinn and I were going on a trip together, instead of taking our individual photos and individual text apps and individual voice memos and then emailing them to each other or sharing them on Google Drive, we could all just have one board that we could all contribute to. And then finally, incorporating more prompts. So you saw the prompt in the text screen. We would love to incorporate, a thing where you could shuffle and shake it and maybe give you a new prompt, or challenging you to take a photo from a different angle, or something that just helps you document more, but also really dive into that moment.
And now that we've shared our experience with the Design Thinking Challenge, we also wanted to consider how can we use a lot of these concepts on our own projects. First of all, we are a company that builds user-facing solutions. So it's important that we build empathy for our users. That way we can more accurately address their needs.
Also, get the prototype in front of users. This is so important, and it's really easy and high ROI whenever you do this. So if you're working on a story that is back end to front end, whenever you're planning this out, maybe don't have the full solution in the back end planned out, but make the prototype, make the HTML, have the users interact with it. Because users may tell you what they want, but they might not actually know what they want until they're interacting with it, and they change their mind because they finally see it. Usually, it really helps to actually show what you want.
And then finally, it's easy to get caught in the technicalities of implementation and development, so it's really important that we stop and consider the why of what we build. Are we building the best solution that we can without really understanding why we're building it?
And that's the end of our presentation on design thinking. Now it's time to take some questions. Let's see. You could go back and do, it changed. Did you consider any way to help people document after an experience so they don't have to have their phone out in the moment?
Well, like we said earlier, we wanted drones, but
well, in the ideation phase, that is something that came up a lot because we know that people pull out their phones as kind of a default, and it can sometimes interfere with their experience. That was actually something in interviews a lot, where people say, "I don't want the camera to get in the way of experiencing it." So we thought about different solutions for that, but as far as reaching out to the most personas, we thought that the mobile app would be the best solution. Okay, next. Can you read that one?
Sean, did any of the people express concern? Did any of the people express concern about not being able to get their entries out of the app in 10 years? I'm obviously a collector. That's a good point. Yeah, we didn't really build towards this prototype, and we didn't really have any questions around being able to pull all of that information out of the app and save it for later use. But I could definitely see the concern there, especially for the collector. And I think one of the main challenges that we focused in building a solution was addressing the needs of all of the personas, and especially in this case, the collector, who is much more tangible. Obviously, there's a much less tangible nature to a mobile application.
Yeah, and to add on to that, one of the ideas that we thought of adding on to it is where at the end of your trip, you could maybe do kind of an export where it could print like a photo album or something like that. I know that there are some apps that already do something like that, but that was an idea that we threw around. But maybe in like the 4th or 5th prototype, we would have gotten to that. So, okay, next. When is the app launching? D. Also, what future features would you like to include? Sharing trips with others, travel guides. Well, to answer the second half, we went over some of the future features that we could have. When is the app launching? Yeah, Quinn, when is the app launching? We haven't really planned to finish working on it, but if anyone wants to join us, we're open to that conversation. Next.
Susan, which method did you see being most useful in your client work moving forward?
Which method?
Yeah, so I think the experience mapping would be awesome for using for clients because that's information that's pretty easy to gather. Just meeting with users that would potentially be using the solution and asking them, can you walk me through your interactions and your workflow and what this is really addressing? We could very easily identify the highs and lows of that experience and make sure that we're building the solution that either elevates or reduces the tension or the positivity that users have in those moments.
Okay, Daniel, was there a particular persona that this solution was geared for? Were the other personas that were considered besides the 4 mentioned? That's a really good question, and that's something that was probably one of the biggest struggles during our work, because shocker, I'm a storyteller, and Quyen is the soul searcher, and so we had to struggle to not only cater towards those, but I think it definitely reached out to the more externally motivated ones, and then for the prompts, the internally motivated. But as we said, the collector kind of has a tough deal. It was really hard to, as technologists, to create a non-technical solution to this problem. And were any other considered besides the 4 mentioned? Did we have any more we talked about?
I mean, the family traveler could very easily use this, just like...
Yeah, but besides those 4, those are really the 4 that we came down to. And I think if we had done more discovery, we probably would have found some more varying personas. So,
can you see Google Glass doing all of this for you so you can be in the moment and sort of magically have documentation at the end? I think that's a very realistic feature, but also very creepy. That sounds very Black Mirror-esque.
Yeah. Yeah, no, actually,
yeah,
just yesterday, we were, just a couple blocks away, and there was a little kiosk that was selling those little Snapchat spectacle glasses that just record everything while you're going. And as soon as we figured out what that was, everyone there was like, ooh, that's a little creepy, and then just like walked away. So maybe in like 20 or 30 years, when people are like more comfortable with how that technology interacts in your life, then I could definitely see that happening. Or drones could just follow you around and take pictures.
Yeah, and that convenience factor, though, is absolutely there. I mean, it's like completely hands-free. You just have something to look back on later.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Matt, how did you avoid letting your preconceived solutions bias you during the discovery and brainstorming phases? Great question. This is something at the beginning that we really struggled with. As soon as we started, we were basically thinking like, we're just going to make an app, aren't we? And our mentor we sat down with him and he was like, I challenge you to not think solution first, to think, just take at face value what your users are saying, put yourself in their shoes and kind of think, go past that first idea that you came up with, because your first idea is usually going to be solving the problem from your point of view. Do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, I think that pretty much covers.
Yeah, good question though. It's really hard. It's really hard not to go into it.
Allison, what led to the realization that your problem statement had evolved? I think the biggest factor in this was our interviews and our surveys. People just over and over expressed that I want documentation, but I want to be in the moment, or I'm too lazy to document. It takes away from really gaining that full experience. And so I think that by narrowing in on that common problem that people kept expressing, rather than just how can we create multimedia journaling, we were able to solve a more interesting problem.
Yeah. That was perfect. Nothing to add. Next, what wicked problems have you seen internally at Pariveda? Whoa.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a kicker. Well, I mean, I'm just thinking recently back to like the High Ground launch. I think that might be something that is trying to solve a wicked problem of, how do we effectively give feedback and how do we effectively recognize people for their accomplishments. I think that's definitely a wicked problem because, it's always changing based on who's in the company and what kind of projects we have and what kind of market you're in, what kind of level you're at. It changes person to person. Some person may really like being publicly praise for something, but other people may say, no, 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 I don't want that social media aspect. So I think that's one wicked problem. Can you think of? I mean, there's so many.
Yeah, I guess I'm also thinking, how can we always have projects that people are really interested in working on? Like a lot of people are working on projects that are super exciting, maybe a really cool tech stack, and then others are kind of less exciting projects. But there's still this need as a company for us to support our clients, provide value to them, and also financially support our firm. So how can we find really interesting projects and give opportunities to Finns to work on those interesting projects?
Yeah, that's a really good one. Thanks for adding that. All right, next. How did you come up with the different items on each of the axes during ideation? I'm assuming, yeah, thanks, Scott. So this is from the pattern plus insight equals feature. I know, at least for me, I just Googled, design patterns and kind of I looked at the apps on my phone, and I was thinking of the things that I interact with every day. I know for the categories nature, we kind of were inspired by that by Trello, because we both use Trello personally and professionally, and kind of seeing things categorized and seeing visually where you're at, that kind of inspired it. And then the insights came from our research. Do you have anything to add to that?
No,
yeah. Oh, good question. Next.
Have you attempted to use the Scamper framework to break down requirement and find unknown/unmet needs? I think the goal of Scamper was more so to get our creative juices flowing and challenge some of our initial ideas to think outside of the box. I don't know that I would really use it as much as coming up with concrete solutions, but well.
Yeah, maybe not for coming up with requirements, but for that unknown, unmet need. So if you're in an early discovery phase of a project, this might be a good activity to do with your potential business users at your client. Because, a client may say, oh, we have this existing application and I want you to put this little button in the sign-in thing so that they can, get their loyalty number or whatever. And then you might say, oh, well, let's do something, this activity, and they may realize that the actual problem is, oh, we want users to be able to, I don't know, it's just an example that a business user may come in saying, I want this thing done, but maybe this could be an activity to step back and be like, well, this is like the jobs to be done framework, right? Like, what do you actually want done? Not the solution, but what's the problem that you're trying to solve? So that's an interesting way of kind of changing the context of that activity. Next, Doug. Do you think our clients should be part of the ideation processes, affinity mapping, et cetera, you described, or just the recipient of the results? Quyen, what do you think?
That is a good question.
I think that it depends. If they're going to be your users, then I think it could actually help. I know that whenever we did, so the Design Thinking Challenge, in addition to doing these, they had presentations from other people in the company about these methods. And I think that they had some examples where they had users in the ideation session and in the discovery session for sure. So I think it depends on the project. So we have time for one more question. Did you need a physical deliverable, and is that why you chose the mobile solution versus the drone solution, which could have been more abstract but creative? No, you didn't have to have a physical deliverable. It could have been a proof of concept. It could have just been wireframes. I know some other groups did some stuff, so I would encourage you to go back and look at the other teams and ask them, send a message on Slack, ask them what other projects they worked on, the different deliverables that they had.
Yeah,
Anything?
I think we also heavily considered how easy or difficult it would be to assess the soundness of our solution. And so something like a drone or a more conceptual solution would probably be a lot more challenging than like a mobile app.
Yeah. So so that's all that we have. Thanks to all the judges and everyone who put together the Design Thinking Challenge, and also our mentor, James Song, who helps us. Yeah, shout out to James. He really helped us a lot throughout the process. So that's all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.